Let's talk about the need for solo training in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. That almost sounds like a contradiction in terms because, as you all know, Jiu-Jitsu requires an opponent. When you go to train with people, there's a reason that you need an opponent to work against. You have to go into a crowded room and work with other people. So a natural question to ask is this even going to be beneficial? Can I enhance my performance levels by training by myself? Let's understand that the definitive answer in this video will be absolutely. This will be a beneficial part of your training. Not only is it beneficial, but there's a direct need for it. As much as Jiu-Jitsu is a social sport that requires opponents, there's a reality that life is complicated, and there's not always going to be times that you can train in your dojo with your partners. There's going to be times you're traveling. There's going to be times you have a family crisis. Probably the most common scenario is one where you're injured and you can't go in and train with opponents in live sparring and drilling. In any one of these scenarios, there's always going to be good reasons why you can't train with others. And one of the axioms of my coaching program is a day without training is a wasted day. You're not going to pull that 24 hours back. Every single day you live your life is an opportunity to get just a little better at the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. And that includes days where you don't go into the dojo. The intention of this video is to show exactly how we can take days off from the gym that aren't days off from progress. There's things you can do by yourself in isolation that will absolutely make you better when you return to the dojo. Of course, the single most important part of your training is going to be partner training with resisting opponents. That's uncontested. But let's not devalue the idea of solo training. We're going to look at the multiple uses and benefits of solo training throughout this video. But let's start with this simple idea that solo training is an important part of your development in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. It's made necessary by events that are often out of your control. But even when your body is healthy and you have the opportunity to train with others, there are still direct benefits to solo training. Let's talk about 3 axioms of Jiu-Jitsu training which underlie this entire video and which have great importance for your development as a developing athlete. The first thing I want to talk about is the idea that every move in Jiu-Jitsu has underlying body movement associated with it. This is an extraordinarily simple and yet very, very deep point about the nature of training in Jiu-Jitsu. I'll say it again because it's very important. Every single move that you learn in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu has underlying movement associated with it. It's almost impossible to learn the moves well if you can't perform those underlying movements. The second thing that I want to talk about is the idea of athleticism. People throw the word athleticism around all the time in various combat sports. The most important thing to understand is that what we describe as athleticism is always domain specific. Attributes that make you athletic in one scenario will not contribute to making you athletic in another scenario. Now, Jiu-Jitsu is unique among the various grappling sports insofar as it puts extraordinary emphasis on the ground, and in particular postures and movement styles on the ground. Most notably, the idea that you have to work effectively off your back. I'm sure you've all had the experience of witnessing, or you might even be someone like this yourself, someone who is a good athlete in another sport, say for example football or hockey or what have you, come in for their first class in Jiu-Jitsu and look like they've never done anything athletic in their life. You've probably also seen the reverse. People who are very good in Jiu-Jitsu suddenly have to go and do another sport, say for example boxing or wrestling, and they look like bumbling amateurs. The idea here is very simple. What we describe as athletic prowess is always specific to a given domain. Because the domain of Jiu-Jitsu is quite unusual, almost entirely on the ground, with 50% of that being on your back, it's difficult for people coming from other sports to take whatever athleticism they had in those other sports and apply it in this new context. All athleticism is contextual. One of the fastest ways you can speed your progress as a developing student is to learn the movements that will make you appear athletic in the specific domain of jiu-jitsu. The better you get at exhibiting those traits of ground athleticism, the faster your progress will be with the actual moves of the sport. Remember, the ultimate idea is to be able to develop skill, to develop a wide repertoire of moves in the sport so you can be effective when you go against another resisting human being in a competitive situation. That's what it always comes back to. It's about sports performance. The sport of jiu-jitsu, you want to go out there and be competitive with the best people, you have to be able to move like an athlete. Because what we call athleticism in jiu-jitsu is radically different from most other sports, it requires a deep sense of training in the athletic movements specific to jiu-jitsu. That's going to be a huge part of what we do here. The third big theme of this video is the idea of shadow grappling. You're all familiar with the idea of shadow boxing, and I'm sure you've all seen on many occasions the talented boxers that we see in Olympic competition and in professional boxing working beautifully with their various shadow boxing routines. My contention is that shadow grappling routines can play a very important part of your development, just as shadow boxing plays an important part in the development of elite striking athletes. Now, I want to discuss something important here. When most people look at solo drills in jiu-jitsu, their experience of them in the gym is almost always as part of a class warm-up. Okay? Many of the moves that we look at here today are going to be done, or you'll see and be familiar with, as something you do as a warm-up before class. There's nothing wrong with that. They are fine as a warm-up. But that's not the point of this video. Ultimately, what's going to make you take these skills that you learn, these physical skills, and allow them to make you a better athlete working against a competitive opponent when you go back to your regular training, is the integration of mind and body. When you use these movements as simply a warm-up, where you're just shrimping up and down the mats for repetition, or in some sense, we just have to pump out a certain number of repetition, the movements become thoughtless. And as a result, they don't really have much benefit. I know many people who can shrimp up and down the mats all day, but they can't shrimp their way out of the mounted position. Okay, that's a real failure. There has to be a tangible benefit to you doing these movements. You can't just flop around on the mat and do movements which don't enhance your sports performance. That's worthless. My idea is to give you a solo set of drills that actually enhance your performance in a competitive situation. If it doesn't do that, it's not worth your time. The only way you can accomplish this is to change your approach to shadow grappling from a warm-up before class, which is done without thought for numbers or distance, and instead start to include the idea of visualization and imagination in your mind, where you are imagining an opponent and you are imagining a scenario that you are in, so that the movements take on a live characteristic. Instead of having a live opponent in front of you, you have a lively imagination in your mind. And that is what propels you from move to move, scenario to scenario, so that you are actively engaging your mind as you perform the physical movements. Just as a good shadow boxer truly imagines an opponent in front of him moving in certain ways and him reacting to that, so too a good shadow grappler imagines an opponent around him and moves in response to the imagined movements. When you integrate mind and body in this fashion, you're shadow grappling instead of simply performing meaningless movements flopping around on the floor with no tangible benefit. My intention in this video is to give you the physical movements you need and then a training routine which engages the mind and body together, so that you are, in a sense, grappling an imaginary opponent rather than simply doing a certain number of moves for a certain number of repetitions. The minute you bridge that gap and you go from solo drills as a meaningless warm-up that has no real carryover to your actual sparring, it's just something you do before class to raise your body temperature, and you start to make it part of an active, imaginative exercise where mind and body are integrated, then you start getting tangible benefits from solo drills. The way we're going to do this in this video is I will demonstrate physical movements. Then with a partner, I will show how they are relevant to the actual sport of jiu-jitsu when it's done in a competitive situation against an opponent. And then we'll give you a training routine where you can start to imagine an opponent, even though you're by yourself, working against them and shadow grappling. So again, we're not just going to use a bunch of meaningless movements flopping around on the mat for a warm-up routine, but rather to get you pushing towards the idea of shadow grappling, just as a good shadow boxer can enhance his performance all by himself, so too can a good shadow grappler. As a coach, one of the most commonly asked questions I receive is always the question, how can I speed up the rate of my progress learning the sport of jiu-jitsu? Over the years, I've always noticed that certain people definitely seem to progress faster than others. Of course, probably the single most relevant element here is training time. How much time is devoted to training? The second element would be the efficiency of use of that training time. It's no good spending vast amounts of time training if the manner in which you train is just woefully inefficient. So the idea that of amount of time spent and the efficiency of which that time is spent is probably the single biggest determinant of rate of progress in learning. But there is another element which I've always noticed over the years. Certain people seem to pick up the physical skills of jiu-jitsu more easily because more than anything else, they have movement skills. They have physical dexterity, which enables them to perform the moves faster than people who lack that dexterity. These solo drills are designed to give you the kind of physical dexterity which is necessary in the specific sport of jiu-jitsu. Probably the greatest gift that this video can give you is the various kinds of body movement which enable you to move in an efficient fashion down on the floor against a resisting opponent. I'll say it again, if you have the underlying dexterity and ease of movement, you will progress faster in the sport than someone who lacks it. In addition, the other great theme that we're going to be looking at here, jiu-jitsu ultimately is the science of control that leads to submission. Everything is about controlling your opponent. But I'll say this to you now, you will never be able to control an opponent until you first learn to control the movements of your own body. There's simply no hope to control another resisting human being if you can't even control your own body movement. Developing that physical dexterity and ease of motion on the floor is your first big step towards that, and the first way and the best way to do this is with solo grappling drills. Now, the first body skill that you're going to have to start with in the sport of jiu-jitsu is the skill of bridging. Let's understand that bridging is a little different in the sport of jiu-jitsu. There are many other sports out there where bridging has a very different intention. So, for example, in the sport of wrestling, bridging is often used as a means of developing a strong back arch throw. So it's often done in a standing position, where from a standing start, we bridge back, looking over our shoulders and take someone over as a throw. Also in the sport of wrestling, bridging is often used as a method of getting your shoulders off the mat to prevent pinning due to the rules of the sport. In gymnastics, bridging is a precursor to many of the various acrobatic moves in which they engage, and so often they bridge onto their hands rather than head and shoulders. All of these are wonderful forms of bridging. They all have their relevance in those sports, but in the sport of jiu-jitsu, bridging has a very definite purpose, and that's to take you from a supine position to a prone position. You start on your back, finish on your hands and knees. Okay. As a result, almost all of the bridging in jiu-jitsu goes over a shoulder rather than a head or onto the hands. The result of this is that the amplitude of the bridge is significantly less. we're not looking for a deep arch in our spine so much as we're looking for the rotation of our body from supine to prone. That requires only a very small lift from the floor. And so the primary movement in Jiu-Jitsu bridging is not amplitude of arch, but rather it's the generation of torque that takes you from supine to prone. Our whole intention is to take someone who's on top of us and quickly whip them over into a position where we go from facing the ceiling to one in which we face the floor, and presumably now we're on top of our opponent. This is done through the generation of torque. You'll see that when I did that bridge, there was not a tremendous lift or arch in my spine. My hips only came a small distance off the floor. The primary concern when we bridge in Jiu-Jitsu is torque, to take a weight which is on top of us and transfer it to underneath us. Okay, if I bridge straight up in the air, that doesn't help me at all. No matter how high my bridge goes, no matter how flexible my spine, my opponent's still on top of me. We end up and he's still on top. The whole idea is to displace weight in Jiu-Jitsu. It's not to carry weight, it's to displace it to either side. So what we need is a bridge which goes to a given direction. That direction is never up, as it would be in, say, yoga or gymnastics, but rather to a tilt to the side. Okay? That means that when we go to work our bridging, the head is going to play a very important role. I'll demonstrate the bridge lined up with the camera. When we first work in this position, I need to take my opponent to a given side. I'm going to start with my feet. If my 2 feet plant on the floor and I bridge, all I do is go straight up to the ceiling. The only way I can effectively displace an opponent is to have an asymmetrical bridge, where one foot is flat and the other foot points out in the direction of my bridge. The idea now is that when I apply force, I go up onto a shoulder. My knee goes into the floor and I create a drive leg. All my power currently comes from the right foot, but I must now transfer this to the left foot, push off the mat, and as a result, we end up with a nice bridge. Let's understand the function of our head in this. Lining up with the camera now, you can see that when I bridge in this fashion, if my head looks up to the ceiling, the bridge is actually stopped by my own head. So what I have to do in these circumstances is to start with the eyes. Every bridge begins with the eyes. I take my eyes and I look in the direction of the bridge. That direction should be a straight line coming out of my head. So once again, our feet line up, one flat on the floor, the other out to the side. My intention is to look straight up and overhead. So my head is no longer a roadblock for my own bridge. Now as I arch, my knee touches the floor. This foot here actively digs into the mat. Don't just come down on a dead foot. When that happens, there's no weight transfer and your bridge flops. So it's important here, once we get up, our foot actively pushes into the mat. As my right foot comes off the mat, the drive switches from right foot to left foot. And as a result, we end up in a good, compact, athletic position. Now it's important when we finish the move, we don't come up into an extended position. Okay? You see this all the time. People do a good job of coming up to the side, doing everything right, but then they come over and flop into a position from which they simply can't be effective. It's important in these situations that once we commit to the side, there's my footwork, as my hips come up off the mat and the weight transfers onto a shoulder, we look in the direction of the bridge. From here we come up, I transfer from my right foot driving to my left foot. We come up into a compact athletic position from where we can be effective. Okay, I'll call in a partner now so you can see how this would apply with a partner. Giancarlo is on top in the mounted position, facing towards the camera. Obviously from here our first responsibility is going to be to trap an arm. It's no good bridging if my opponent can base out and resist. Once we get that arm trap, then from here we trap our training partner's foot, my feet go into that asymmetrical position, my head comes over, and now you'll see Giancarlo starts putting his hand out for base. But if I play this game correctly, I will be able to overturn his base and come up into a compact athletic position inside my opponent's guard. Facing in another direction now. From here, Giancarlo comes into a good position. We successfully go through and trap our training partner's arm. You do this in any way you wish. From here, we lock up. You see everything goes on to the shoulder, forcing his defensive reaction with his second hand, even as his hand comes out further and further for base. If I play my cards correctly here, we look in the direction we want to go, his base of support just runs out at a certain level. Now I just push off my remaining foot, and we come up inside our training partner's guard and in good position. Used in this way, the bridge will be an absolutely crucial part of your development. We'll see also that the bridge ties into other solo movements that we have to perform. It gives you that fundamental skill of going from a supine position to a prone position, from bottom to top in a very short period of time, even against much heavier opponents. Understand that bridging in Jiu-Jitsu, because of the very nature of the sport, does have a somewhat different look from what many people in other sports would characterize as a good bridge. It tends to have low amplitude, where the emphasis is on torque and speed of rotation that takes you from supine to prone position. Now, let's spend some time looking what is incontestably the body movement most associated with the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. This is shrimping. It's the basis of the entire bottom game in the sport. And so even though bridging has tremendous importance, I think it's pretty clear to say that shrimping is the heart and soul of body movement, and the first and most important body movement that you must master. Now, unfortunately, shrimping is normally taught in a rather complacent fashion as a warm-up before class, where people simply shrimp mindlessly up and down the mat and probably are left at the end of it wondering what the hell that has to do with combat sports. Let's change that and start to see shrimping not as a warm-up, but rather as a skill to be mastered. Let's understand there are different forms of shrimping. Okay, we're going to look at a conventional pushing shrimp and look at some variations of that. Okay, the first and most important one for you to learn is the idea of a power shrimp, where we have to take our hips off the mat. So in fact, a power shrimp begins with almost exactly the same movement that we saw with bridging. The idea is we're going to come up with our hips up off the floor onto a shoulder and have just our feet in contact with the mat and one shoulder. Okay, our elbows will always be close to our own torso. It's very hard to perform these movements with extended arms. So as a general rule, we want our elbows close to our own torso. A good thing to have is just your hands close together, like you're in a prayer kind of situation, and that will keep your elbows automatically close to your own torso. So from a situation where we start off, we get our feet asymmetrical, one foot flat on the mat, one foot turned outwards, and from here we come up and onto our shoulder like so that there's a slight facing down towards the mat of my body, and the only points of contact I have with the mat are my feet and my shoulder. Now, this gives us an ability to move our hips. Okay, if I just turn over onto my side, my hips don't move well on the floor. I have no ability to generate power off the floor. Okay, and so what passes for a shrimp for most people, it's kind of like a lazy sliding movement, doesn't generate any kind of athletic potential on the part of the bottom athlete. That's why you'll often see people who shrimp like this for hours on end, but then when it's time to actually perform an escape on a resisting human being, they're helpless. They can't utilize the movement they've used at all. So what we want to be able to do is to be able to come up and off the floor so that we have some kind of athletic potential here. And we can use our feet now to join elbow and knee together and create a motion where my knee and elbow come through and my hips come out on the other side. Now from here, we perform a second movement where again, only the feet and shoulders are in contact with the floor. We bring elbow and knee together. We come up. No contact with the mat except the feet and the shoulder, and as a result elbow and knee can come together and my knee comes inside my own hands, just as it would come inside my opponent's knee in a live competitive situation where I was trying to escape from mount or bottom side control. And then from here we come out to the other side. I'll demonstrate it from a different angle. We start off, we have an opponent on top of us. My feet come up just like so, and we come up off the floor, just like this. Now my hips have an ability to move side to side. I have an ability to invert my knee, so my knee goes inside my imaginary opponent's knee, and as a result, we can come out on the other side. Now from here, we come out, and from this position, elbow and knee come out together, and we put our opponent hopefully back in guard. Now, that's the power shrimp. Let's contrast that with a sliding shrimp, which is probably the one more familiar to most of the viewers of this video. In a sliding shrimp, we simply plant the foot out wide, and I slide my body out along the mat. I plant the foot, and I slide out along the mat. As a general rule, you want to be able to move at least 90 degrees with your hips. So if we have a given line, here's a line on the tatami. If my shoulders are on that line, like so. When I go to shrimp, I want my hips to come up to what was my shoulder line, okay? So I plant my foot, and then from this position, we shrimp, and my hips come all the way up to the shoulder line. You don't want to be lazy with this, where you simply shrimp the minimum distance to struggle down the mat as a warm-up before class. The idea is we measure out our shoulder line, and my hips should come up to that line. When we start, you have to move your foot. Don't just shrimp from wherever your feet are. You'll never get to the shoulder line. From here, we have to move our foot out wide, and foot goes up to the buttocks. Only that will enable us to push and get our hips all the way up to the line of our shoulder. Now we bring our foot out on the other side, and we repeat the process, bringing our hips all the way up to the shoulder line. You want to finish with your hands right in front of your knees, like so. So every time we come out, we come hips to shoulder line, hands to knees. Okay? And by combining sliding and power shrimps, you'll be an effective athlete working from bottom. Let's look now at some common sense examples of how this could be used against an opponent. Giancarlo's on top of me in the mounted position. I'm just going to demonstrate first with our feet towards the camera. If Giancarlo has his feet close together and he's in the mounted position, and I simply slide along the mat, you're going to see that I'll never escape from the mounted position. Lock your feet in. From here, when I just slide along the mat, he stays locked to my body. The only way I'm going to get out is to put either elbow or hand inside my opponent's knee. I can't be naive here and offer my elbow to Giancarlo to go underneath like so. So it's important under these circumstances that when we block on our opponent, we come up so that our hips are off the floor. And now, with my knee inverted, I easily go inside my training partner's knee. So we're halfway out. Now from here, we perform a sliding shrimp on the other side. So you see I slide my body out, my legs come around, and from here, we have our opponent back in guard. Can you see what's happening? The first shrimp was a power shrimp. It got my hips off the floor and enabled me to invert my knee. What does that mean? When we first go into shrimp, if my knees face up to the ceiling, I'll never get past Giancarlo's leg. The key element behind the idea of a power shrimp is the inversion of my knee. So my knees face down towards the floor. It's that which enables me to get inside his knee. Then we perform a sliding shrimp to free the second leg and put our opponent back in guard. So once again, if I just slide, I'll never get out of the mounted position. So we have to wedge the inside of his knee. Then from this position, I take my hips up off the floor, looking over my head as we saw earlier. And then with my knee inverted, lock those legs tight, Giancarlo, even when his feet are crossed, I'll always be able to get my knee inside his. Now from here, we perform a sliding shrimp. I slide, my knee comes through, and now we're in the perfect position to put our opponent back in guard. So too, when we're being pinned across side. If my opponent was relaxed and not particularly skilled in Jiu-Jitsu, it might be enough just to slide out and bring my knee in. But if Giancarlo's knees are in tight and he's holding me here and doing a good job, you can see he's controlling my hip. So every time I slide out, he just slides with me. I never get my knee inside. So the idea here is to hit a power shrimp, where we begin with a bridge that moves his head and creates a situation where my knee goes in very easily. Then a slide shrimp, and he's back in our guard. Okay? So this idea that we must understand there are two forms of shrimping. The power shrimp initiates the movement. Because it involves a small bridge, it knocks our opponent out of balance and creates an inverted knee. that inverted knee fits into the tightest crevice to get inside your opponent's knee or hip to escape side or mounted positions. Then we free the second leg with a simple sliding shrimp. And the combination of those two body movements together is going to make you effective at getting out of these annoying pins. Now, we just looked at the skill of shrimping, which I believe, and I'm sure 99.9% of the Jiu-Jitsu community would agree with me on this, is the single most important body movement associated with the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. That's the one you must focus on. Now, I'm going to say something which probably fewer people would agree with me on, and that's it. There is a very close second to shrimping in terms of value and importance for you as a developing athlete, and that is reverse shrimping. This is a kind of shrimping that never gets any attention and yet is absolutely crucial, especially in the higher levels of the sport, to become effective in bottom position. Okay, let's understand what is reverse shrimping. Well, conventional shrimping that we just saw in the previous sequence is a pushing movement. The idea in a basic shrimp is that I plant a foot and I push off that foot so that I have minimal contact with the mat, and as a result, I can move my hips freely, invert my knee, and start escaping. Okay, so that's conventional shrimping. Now, what is reverse shrimping? That's a pulling movement, where instead of planting a foot and pushing off the mat, I plant my toes and pull on the mat. What it does, what it's designed to do, is to change the spatial relationship between you and your opponent. Okay, and it's going to become very, very important when you're stuck under tight pins. So the basic body movement is we're going to reach along the mat and plant the ball of the foot and the toes on the mat. The complete opposite of what we do in a normal shrimp, where we plant the heel and push. Here, we're planting the ball of the foot and we pull ourselves towards that foot. So we plant and pull. We plant and pull. We plant and pull, as opposed to plant and push, plant and push. So we're moving forwards when we drill it in repetition. It takes me from a situation where I'm on my right-hand side and converts it to one where I'm on my left-hand side. Now, the first question you're probably asking is, what the hell is the value of that? How's that going to help me against someone who's holding me down? Well, let's look at some common sense examples. Very often, you will find it difficult to get out of a given pin type situation, and you need to change the angle to get the ball rolling. Another very common scenario is one where you're defending a very strong form of guard pass, and as a result, you need to change the angle between you and your opponent to be effective. Okay, let's say, for example, my training partner is standing over me and he's done a great job of passing my legs and is coming around to the side. Not only is he coming around to the side, but he's starting to get damn close to chest contact. As a result, he's gone past my initial frames, and as he comes down towards chest to chest position, he's getting very, very close. He's come onto my forearms. You can see it's going to be hard work to defend from here. Okay, he's in a position where he can start pushing my knees down, and my knees are now facing the wrong way to put him back in guard. Okay, so as I feel an opponent getting closer and closer and my knees are being pushed off in the wrong direction, that's where reverse shrimping comes in. I put my foot on the mat and I pull my ass towards my foot. As my frame comes up into place, I now get opportunities to throw my legs back in, and from here we're in a position where we can go back in and retain our guard. Did you see what happened here? It took me from a situation where I was about to be pinned across side to one where I switched our orientation to north-south, and as a result I was able to high leg over and put my opponent back in guard. So once again, a common situation, my opponent goes into pass and does a good job of coming in almost across side. Now I have to change the orientation between us, so I use a reverse shrimp to bring everything in almost like a quasi north-south position, and from there we can go in with our legs and recover and get back into a good sound attacking position. Another way in which you might use this is when you actually are pinned across side. Now, you'd love to hit a conventional elbow escape, you'd love to hit all the normal escapes, but sometimes it's tough and we've got to change the angle. So we're getting pinned down here and we're having a hard time getting our normal escapes to work. So we're going to take our foot and we're going to give a little bump and a reverse shrimp. It gets our body back inside. Okay. Now from here, as Giancarlo comes down on top and tries to create those new angles, we bring knees together, spin underneath our training partner, and from here, we're back into a good sound attacking position. So when I feel my escapes in a given body angle just aren't working, I'm going to change the orientation of my body relative to his. Here we are. I'm having no success with my conventional elbow escapes or what have you. So from this position, look how I take my body out to the side and I physically pull along the mat. So that now we're almost quasi north-south. As he goes in to reassert the new pin, there's space that we can take advantage of. And as a result, from here, we're able to go to work. So these might be good examples where we can use reverse shrimping. Some other classic examples of reverse shrimping in operation from bottom half guard, for example. From a situation where I've gotten deep around my opponent's legs, like so, and we want to start tilting our training partner over, we're going to trap our training partner's ankle from here. I do a good job of tilting my opponent, but he does a good job of basing out with his right arm. So from here, we've almost got him up, but he's not quite there yet. Okay. Under these circumstances, we're going to hit reverse shrimping. I plant my right foot on the mat and I start pulling myself down towards the floor and knock the man over. Even when Giancarlo goes to follow my movement, it's so difficult for him to keep up with that transition from reverse shrimp to standard shrimp. Reverse shrimp starts it. Conventional shrimp finishes it. Reverse shrimp. Conventional shrimp. Reverse shrimp. Conventional shrimp. And as a result, we're able to score that knockdown. So these are some practical ways in which this all-important yet somewhat undervalued movement of reverse shrimping can play an important role in your game. Now, the next body movement that we're going to look at is one that gets a lot of derision and fun pointed at it. That's scooting, or butt scooting as it's often referred to. I know a lot of people rag on butt scooting and say that it's this dreadful thing which has become prevalent in jiu-jitsu over the last decade or so. Let's understand something. It's an important part of the sport. The idea behind scooting is that it's a more efficient way for me to move forwards and backwards than shrimping is in terms of distance covered. It's easier for me to cover more distance when I'm in a seated position, scooting, than it is when I'm in a supine position, shrimping. Okay, so the idea behind this is, if I'm down on my back, I can only move so fast. But when I'm seated, I can move both forwards and backwards much more rapidly and cover much more distance. Okay, when I'm down here, if I use reverse shrimping, it puts a definite limit on how fast I can move. But when I come up to a seated position, because there's much less contact with the mat, and I get a much greater ability to lift hips off the floor and throw my body from one side to the other and move forwards and backwards in this fashion, you can see my movements are much faster. So it's a way for me to keep bottom position. Okay, sometimes in the sport of jiu-jitsu, for tactical reasons, there's good reasons to stay on bottom. It might be because your opponent's better than you in the standing position, you're reluctant to stand up, or you just have some kind of gain from bottom. Perhaps you're someone who favors the idea of entering into your opponent's legs for leg lock actions or what have you. These are good times for you to stay in the seated position and scoot. Okay, you're going to be much, much faster and much, much more active and have a wider range of movements available to you in a seated position than you will down here in a supine position where you're more or less stationary. So understand that if we are in a seated position like this, if the situation should demand it, it's very easy for you to go straight back to your back and resume more conventional supine positions as well. So even though people make fun of it, it's an important part of the game. Get used to it. So two ways to scoot: two-handed methods and one-handed methods. When we go forward, it's almost always one-handed methods, like so. Okay, the idea is I'm going to have a foot which plants, and if I want to throw my body forward, I plant on that foot, everything goes forward, and I can cover quite a bit of distance in a short motion. When I go backwards, I have the option of one hand scooting methods and two-handed scooting methods. Two-handed scooting methods are faster, but they do tie up both of your arms. So you've got to move quickly to where you want to go, and then reassert your various methods of posturing. As a general rule, you can scoot forward without hands, but it's not a particularly fast-moving way to do it. You might want to do this for tactical reasons, but for movement reasons, it's better to plant a hand. Okay. As a general rule, we don't encourage planting two hands and moving forward. That's way too risky. It's okay to move quickly backwards, like so, and reassert yourself, but I don't recommend coming forwards towards an opponent like so. Okay, we always want to present a side-on body position to our opponent and move forwards behind the cover of our two knees, rather than presenting a situation where my opponent can pass on either side as I'm scooting forwards. Okay, so the general rule is we can use two-handed scoots in a backwards direction or one-handed scoots. But when it's time to go forwards, we only use the one hand on the floor method. For tactical reasons, occasionally you might like to use a crawling method, but it's rather slow and unwieldy, and I would only use this if I was afraid of various kinds of flying submissions or what have you. When we do post like so, there is some danger on the extended arm of flying submissions, so let's make sure we keep elbow and knee relatively close together, and we're circumspect in the way in which we reach. Okay. Now, you might be, if you're new to Jiu-Jitsu, wondering what the hell does this have to do with combat sports. Let's have a look right now. We have a training partner in front of us. Most of the time when he's interested in passing my guard, he's going to have to close distance on me. Okay, he's going to have to get distance and angle are the first two things he wants to do. If he's far away from me, then from here, there's not much he can do to pass my guard. So the first thing he has to do is close distance. Then the second thing he has to do is get angle. Okay, if I just stay stationary and I give him distance and angle, he's going to pass my guard at some point. So our whole thing is I always want my opponent in front of my legs. Okay, anytime my opponent moves outside of my legs, warning signs go off that that's a bad thing. Okay, so whenever I see my opponent closing distance and getting angle, our thing from here is always to scoot back and recover distance. Okay, I always want my opponent on one side of my body. If I present my body to his center line, he can pass this way or he can pass this way, and I don't know which. Okay, but if I put my opponent on one side of my body, he can't pass this way, it's too far to go. He takes a risk. If he goes in this direction, I can easily trip my opponent out of balance. Okay, so now he can only pass in this direction. So now I know where he's going to go. Okay, so this is the idea behind scooting. It's a method of distance management. Start over with it. So if my opponent is aggressively coming towards me, it might behoove me just to scoot back on two hands for a brief period of time. Okay, so if I see him make a big aggressive movement, I might just do like so. So now again, he's in front of my legs. Okay, if his movements are less aggressive, then I'm probably just going to stay with the one-handed method, just like so. Every time he goes to move forward, we monitor distance, just like so. Okay. Now, a second kind of problem is an opponent who's retreating from us. Perhaps, for example, he's afraid of your leg lock game. He knows if he stays in front of us in situations like this, it's pretty easy for us now to go into our training partner's legs. Okay. So he might be saying, you know, I don't want this guy going into my legs. So he's playing a tactical game of moving backwards. If I just go like so, or just try to move towards him, it's hopeless. I'll never get a hold of this guy. So when we see someone moving away from us, we have to be able to cover distance. The way we do this is by putting a foot on the floor and planting it, just like so. And then I want to physically throw my body towards my opponent so we make distance on him and cover distance across the floor and get to an opponent who's trying to retreat. If I have an opponent, just moving out in this way, Giancarlo, here he's at distance, I have to be able to cover distance on this guy. Okay, I'm not going to do it two-handed because now he can just jump past my guard in either direction. Okay, I don't have any means of posting and moving. So I have to be able to cover quite a bit of distance in some of these cases. And the way we do this is by planting a foot. So I switch. Normally I have my body like so. I put my foot down on the floor. I physically jump off the mat. So everything comes off the mat and we cover distance towards our opponent. Okay. So once again, we're here in front of our training partner. He's moving away. He's very cautious and won't engage with me. So here I plant, and then we just throw our body, and now we've closed distance on our opponent, and we're in a situation now where we have contact, and we're ready to play. So those might be some realistic ways in which we use scooting as both an offensive movement of going towards an opponent and a defensive movement for preventing them gaining distance and angle upon us.